Catholics.
What do you think that says to the Catholic Church regarding how to strengthen the faith and revitalize the life of its own members? Here you have Alpha, which is a discipleship training program. It teaches people about their faith, about the scriptures, about the elements of a vital Christian life and so on, and having such an impact on the Catholic Church, and not necessarily leading people to go outside of the Catholic Church, but really strengthening their own Catholic understanding, and what it can do to the Church. What do you think the Church has learned from that kind of a
this
journey?
expression that you've heard us all use, which is sort of a very important sort of theme in the Catholic Church today, is this new evangelization. And it was first enunciated actually all the way back to Vatican II and Paul VI, but it was John Paul II who particularly highlighted it, and Benedict following him has continued it. And it's really a rich, rich image of a renewal of the church, and it's got three components to it. One is the evangelization of the people in the pew. I think a discerning Catholic leadership knows not everybody who's sitting out there coming to Mass on Sunday is converted. I think Cardinal Sunas, another great former leader, said we've sacramentalized our people, but we haven't evangelized them. And of course, most evangelical churches are full of people like him who lapsed into it for a while, although you've gone back. People who literally grew up Catholic, but were not brought to a personal relationship with Jesus
You're just
Christ.
kind of coasting on
In the old days, they called it nominalism.
Membership,
You were going through the motions, but you were not born again in the Spirit in your heart, and you did not have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. It's very interesting. The language in the Catholic Church now talks a lot about friendship with Jesus. Friendship with Jesus. Now, any evangelical will say, wow, that's what we're about too. Friendship with Jesus. The second dimension of the new evangelization is an awareness that the culture that was formerly Christian has evaporated in its Christianity. Europe, I mean, I don't know what the percentage of people who go to church in Europe, but it's pathetic. And of course, the United States is gliding in that same direction. Every time we have a poll, the church attendance goes down. The people who self-identify as Christians goes down. We're in the same process of secularization. So the new evangelization is about re-evangelizing the cultures that were Christian in the past. And then the third dimension of re-evangelization would be sort of a little bit more like what the average evangelical understand, really going out and reaching the unchurched, the pagans, the unbelievers, people from other religions, bringing them to a saving knowledge in Jesus Christ. So it's a rich vision that the popes have laid out for the church.
And so from my perspective, it's also a practical element here, because if you look at the tool of Alpha, it's very simple. But it has all the components of a true evangelization stream, and it's processed over time. So at a 10-week period, you hear, who's Jesus? Why did Jesus die? Why should I read the Bible? How can I be sure of my faith? Why should I pray? And for Catholics, they've never thought this way. They've never been discipled. They've never been formed in this way. So I had a good friend who went through Alpha, who was very skeptical about it, very bright, educated man. And he came away from the course, and my daughter was the table leader at that time for him. And he said, wow, he said, it filled all the cracks in the road for me. And that's what it does. A Catholic doesn't leave the church when they do Alpha. They become engaged and want to do more, and they look for places to go so that they can teach CCD, they can be lectors, whatever the church allows them to do. Now we try to expand what that model is. They can do more than that, but it gives them that assurance. Then I remember a very fascinating situation years ago. A couple came to Alpha, and we said, why are you coming? He said, well, I want to be able to answer the questions my children are asking. They couldn't do it. So who is God? Very simple, basic question. So Alpha does all of that, and it does it in a multidimensional task. So that's why I've really grasped it. And as a priest, Father James Mallon, who in Canada? Nova Scotia, a beautiful man, who said he's looked for years for a better program, but he cannot find one. And it really is the tool that I think the Catholic Church is now learning to embrace in a significant way.
What I hear from you guys is, in a sense, some of those potential unifying elements between these different sectors of the faith that is challenging people Christians to own their faith, to have a kind of a crisis experience and to ask themselves, well, why am I here? That is in being a Catholic or a Protestant.
Right.
Rather than just being born into culturally,
Right.
into the church, I think it is that calling for each individual to come to that point of owning and internalizing what they believe. And for that, you have to ask yourself certain questions. You have to go through certain elements of the faith and learn them.
That's correct.
In order for them to have true meaning. And I think one of the problems with institutional Christianity, wherever it might be, Protestant, Catholic, is this idea that simply because people are in the atmosphere of the church, somehow by just breathing in the atmosphere, they'll become Christians, and that's not the case.
No,
There's always this emphasis on, hey, you have to learn the elements of the faith. You have to go through a process of owning and making that
There's
yours.
that great line of David Duplessis, one of the great Pentecostal leaders. The God has no grandchildren, and you know, each person really has to find the Lord as Father for themselves. And it's interesting. David Duplessis also was the Pentecostal observer to Vatican II, and was told by the Lord to bring the Pentecostal message to Catholicism, which he did, although I think he might have got thrown out of his Pentecostal church for doing it.
And finally, they did recognize they had made a mistake and
He did come back.
reinstated him.
But you see these great prophetic giants like him who really were building these bridges 50, 60 years ago already. Amazing.
Interestingly, I just read a tiny little article by the Barna organization saying that 36% of Hispanic Catholics consider themselves charismatic. So that's, you know, that's significant, almost 40% in terms of seeing the gifts of the Spirit as something for the life of the believer today and not just historically from Christianity as a whole. And I think the charismatic movement in Catholicism has had a very powerful impact
They estimate
on the vitality of the Catholic faith.
They estimate that 10% of all Catholics were impacted by the charismatic renewal, going back to, say, 1967, and then spreading around the world. So I was involved in my work in the Diocese of Manchester in the charismatic renewal. So about 10% around the world, they estimate, which is quite a, 100 million.
Yeah, and you know, I think it's interesting that you mentioned Jesus and Christ at one point regarding as the focal point for vitality in the Christian life, which every Protestant would resonate with as the focal point, no? And for some reason, I think from the Protestant side, we often do not hear that emphasis on Jesus, and it's refreshing to hear it from you. Could you just speak into that a little bit? And because I know the Pope Francis, in one of his presentations, just I think the second time that he spoke to the cardinals, he spoke about the need to bring Christ again into the center. He said something along the lines of, if we don't have Christ and the cross in the center, that we're simply do-gooders, well-intentioned, people with an ethical kind of background, and we're not building on the rock, but rather on the sand.